Hey guys, Monroe with MT Homes, here with my next project, which will be this laminate floor install. And I thought I'd put a little video together and show you how I do it. So one of the first things you want to do when installing a laminate floor is to make sure it's acclimated. And by acclimating, I mean it needs to be in the room that it will be installed in at room temperature for a certain amount of time before you install the floor. And that allows the flooring to acclimate temperature-wise and in some cases moisture-wise to the room so that it won't expand or contract once it's installed. Each flooring manufacturer has different recommendations, so the best thing to do is look in the box for instructions. This one has it on the back side of the description. There's detailed instructions and details on how long it needs to be acclimated. And this says that it needs to be in the room at least 24 hours prior to installation. So this flooring has been in here for about a week, so it's ready to put in. It's always a good idea to leave it in at least twice as long as what they recommend, just to make sure it's properly acclimated. Some of the tools required for this job include a hand planer or a belt sander, a drill, some screws, a flat bar, a hammer, tapping block, a pull bar, a rubber mallet, a utility knife, tape measure, and a lead pencil and a Sharpie, a speed square, and a couple of straight edges, a flooring scraper, and a broom. Before I start laying my floor, first thing I want to do is prep the floor. Part of that process is taking this scraper and knocking off all my drywall mud. After I've scraped the floor with the floor scraper, next thing I want to do is take this hand planer, and a belt sander will work as well. I want to knock off anything that the scraper didn't get, as far as if there's some adhesive on the floor from a previous floor or all the seams. Just make sure they're all laying nice and flat. If not, I'll take this planer and knock all the seams in the plywood down, and just make sure the floor's fairly smooth so that to help the laminate lay flatter. When I'm doing a remodel and the casings and the doors are already installed, what I'll have to do is go around and undercut all my door jambs and door casings. To do that, I'll use a scrap piece of flooring like this. I'll lay it up against the casing, and then I can use either a jam saw and I'll undercut it right at the top of the floor there, or I can use one of these multi-cutters and cut it that way as well. So after I get it cut, it'll be setting up something like that, and I can slide my floor underneath. Since this laminate flooring is a floating floor, it needs to be kept away from the wall at least 1/4 inch. For a new construction, I'll just keep it 1/4 inch away from the drywall, and then I'll set whenever I do my base trim, I will set it on top like that. Now if I have a remodel, or let's say my base trim is already down, I can either keep it away from the base trim 1/4 inch, and then after I'm done with laying my floor, I'll run a bead 1/4 round, or run a piece 1/4 round all the way around the perimeter of the room. Or sometimes it's just as easy to take up the base trim, lay my floor like I would a new construction, and then just put my base trim back down after I'm done. In my opinion, that looks neater. As far as cutting this flooring, The manufacturer recommends the score and snap method, which basically it's just when you figure out where you want to cut your floor, you set your speed square on it, score it with your utility knife, and you should be able to just snap it. So it's pretty easy to cut that way. It can also be cut with a circular saw or a miter saw, but it's much easier if we can just score and snap it with utility knife. Not all laminate floors can be cut like this, but this one can, so it makes it handy for sure. When it comes to determining which way I want to lay my floor in the room, there's a couple of things I factor in. The first thing, and probably to me what I'll go by the most, is which way are my floor joists running. I like to run my flooring perpendicular with the floor joists. In a laminate it doesn't matter as much, but in a hardwood it'll add strength. And it also, most likely, the waves will be, if their floor is wavy, it'll be this way. So if you run the floor perpendicular to your floor joists, it won't look as bad if your floor is a little bit wavy. And the second thing is, which is your longest wall or your straightest wall. So for this one right here, this is our longest wall in this room. And I think that'll be the way to go, which is also perpendicular to the floor joist. Most laminate flooring requires an underlayment, but this flooring actually has the underlayment attached to it on the back side. To start laying my floor, what I'll do is I'll lay a couple of rows together out away from the wall and get about 2, maybe even 3 rows tied together, so I got a nice straight line. And then I'll slide it back in place, and I'll run some screws on the back side to hold it in place temporarily. So right here where I have a vent underneath this piece of flooring, I'll mark it out where the vent is in the floor. I'll set my piece in place where it needs to be, 1/4 inch away from the wall, and I'll just transfer those marks onto the flooring. And then I want to make a mark at the front of the floor to measure back to know where my vent goes. And from that mark I'll measure back, so it's 7/8 and 4 7/8. Transfer that onto my piece here. About 3 rows of flooring laid together. I want to take my screws and go along the back side, make sure that the registers fit in place, make sure I've got a 1/4 inch gap all the way through there. And I'll put a screw behind the floor here to hold it in place temporarily, so while I'm tapping the rest of the floor in place, it won't move around. I'll put about 1 in each piece. You see the screw is behind the floor, and it's just in there temporarily. I'll take it out once I have the flooring completed. Alright, now that we got our first 3 rows in place, the rest is pretty easy. To start a row, what I'll do is take a piece and cut it, because I want to offset my seams. I don't want my seams any closer than about 8 inches at least. And I usually like to go about 1/3 of the piece is where I want my seams to be in. So I got a seam right here and a seam right here, so I want my next seam to be somewhere in here, just put them in there randomly so they don't look patternized, look like there's a pattern. I'll just take my square, my knife, score it, snap it, and cut the alignment. And then this piece, the scrap piece, I'll use at the other end to finish the row. And I'll grab another full piece. The first two pieces I'll attach the ends, and then I'll lay them in place. And to lay them in, I just tilt them up a little bit, make sure my end's at a 1/4 inch, and then just push back as I lay it down. And if it don't go in place right away, I can take this hammer and tapping block and I can tap it back in place. And even after I get the piece in place, I'll take the hammer down through there and lightly tap just to make sure it's in place. And for the next piece, I'll keep my toe on this to keep it from tilting upwards back there, and I'll slide it back to where it's almost, or to where it's touching this piece, and I'll fasten the end, make sure to pull towards me, and then I'll tilt it up. As you see, I'm tilting this piece with it, but my toe's holding the back of it so that it don't pop back out, and I'll slide it back in place. Maybe. So as you see, that piece slid back in place, then I'll just work my way down through there. And there it is. Once the piece is in place, I'll take this hammer and tapping block. Again, I'll just lightly tap it, make sure it's locked together. Here's my scrap piece. I cut off the other end, so when I get to the end here, I'll turn it around backwards and set my gap at a 1/4 inch. And I'll set my square right here where the end of the other piece is, and I'll score it, being really careful not to hit the existing floor. Again, I'll just snap it. Put it in place just like the rest of them. And there it is.